most mills have built up their log supply. Most people hopefully are not operating, at least in central Maine, in the woods right now and waiting for things to dry out. So if we have to take anything positive, if there's a silver lining to any of this, it's that this didn't happen in the most frozen, time of year where we're mostly operating and really trying to get what may be the year's production or 80% of our year's production in the frozen ground. So first and foremost, let's talk about pulpwood. In general, I think what you're going to see moving forward is hardwood pulp still being very much in demand, very much easy to move. Pricing could fluctuate, but I think we won't have trouble moving hardwood pulp. You want to check with your forester and check with your wood buyer as far as the specs going to any particular mill, because there will be limitations on, oak to some markets, and they may want it cut to certain lengths depending where you're going. But in general, hardwood is a bright spot, and it looks to be unfazed, at least from being able to deliver to the mills. Spruce fir is a different story, both on the log side and the pulp side. Everything we hear is that the studwood mills are full. When spruce fir pulp prices got better and when mills started taking it, suddenly the price of logs went up. It makes sense. You couldn't move spruce fir for a long time. There were a lot of logs on the market, supply and demand, price was kind of downward pressure. I think what we're going to see now is, and we are seeing already, is just an oversupply of spruce fir. And also the lack of mills, softwood mills actually taking it. There are still bright spots. Again, looking forward, we may see the Old Town Mill finally get up and running. Again, everything happening with the virus, it's hard to say exactly what their schedule is. I know they tried to tinker with it, try to get it going. And finally, about a month ago, I think they decided to completely just rebuild or rehash the digesters. The hope, and I've said this before, the hope is that once that mill is up and running, that there's a giant sucking sound coming from the Old Town area that is just being filled by hemlock and pine pulp. Because if that's the case, we are in good shape. My perspective is that regardless of the price, if we have an outlet to move it and it's not biomass, it's going to be a really good thing. So let's just hope that that continues. You may know that ND Paper is a Chinese-owned company. There was a great article in the New York Times about them. If you haven't read it, go back and check it out. They are very well financed. They're actually consuming the fiber that the mills are making. So they're less susceptible to a customer, like if a mill is making pulp and selling it to a customer and the customer changes their product. So they have a very good potential there for that to be up and running. As far as just backing up to hardwood for a second, again, another bright spot from what I'm hearing is that a lot of mills, hardwood mills, particularly north of the border, did not build up their log inventories as much as they had hoped. But if you're in the log buying business right now, and let's say you're buying whitewoods, you don't know by the time that you accumulate a load and you find a trucker, if by the time that happens that they're going to close the border, for example. You just have no idea. And so most log yards are not buying logs right now at all. There are some exceptions and there are some, certain deals or arrangements that can be made, but for the most part, but again, this is mud season. This is the time of year where we're not operating anyway, so it's not really affecting us now. June, mid-June, maybe late June, early July, when things really start getting going again, we all hope that this has settled out. So again, we may have dodged a bullet, so to speak, for our industry, at least for landowners. I've said this before as well, but we need to be very supportive of the sawmill industry, particularly in our state, because it's scary times for them. I'll tell you, most of the mills I speak with in the concentration yards say that last year was their worst year ever. And it was almost entirely due to tariffs. The tariffs on to China for exporting of logs and lumber. Those tariffs were lifted for a year at the end of February. What timing? You lift the tariffs and then suddenly the world shuts down. So a lot of these mills are suffering and will continue to suffer. But there is a bright spot in the sense that as the Chinese, as the Asian countries start to come back up, factories start to produce again, and as interest builds in American hardwoods, which bar none, we have the finest wood. They like doing business with American companies. We have not only the raw material, we have the roads, we have the ports, we have laws. You know, we don't have to bribe everybody to get something done. There will be demand for American hardwoods. The problem I'm hearing now is you may have an order for an export container of logs, but actually getting a container to show up is almost impossible. We need everything to restart. We need to get the process of containers coming over with goods, containers going back with, you know, logs and lumber and anything else that we're selling. And that's just going to take time because everything has been disrupted. Just going down the species as far as pine goes, you know, the pine lumber market is extraordinarily stable. Even right now, it seems pretty much untouched. I think log buyers and mills that have stopped buying logs, my understanding is it's more out of not wanting to get oversupplied, not knowing what's going to happen. One thing you have to remember is that, and this is switching over to my lumber and flooring side, anything that we're delivering now to a job site, whether it's flooring or paneling or trim, those projects all broke ground maybe a year ago, maybe last summer. So you have this backlog of orders. People have already specified that they want this type of floor, they want this panel, they want this, you know, wood. So there's still demand. In fact, it's been actually fairly busy on the flooring side the past couple of weeks for a number of reasons, but that is going to stop. And so if you're a sawmill and you're buying logs, if it's pine, you know, maybe, I don't know, let's say 45 days from now, you might be looking at lumber if it goes through the sawmill and the kiln and processing. If you're an oak mill, it might be 3 months, 4 months before that lumber goes through the system. So who knows what the price is going to be, what the demand is going to be. So that's been the reason for the shutdown of buying logs right now. But again, it's mud season. It's the best time it could have happened. So we should be thankful for that, in my opinion. Just a couple more, and then again, I don't want to talk the whole time. I'd love to get your questions. As far as hemlock and cedar, I kind of group those together because they've always just been kind of dog items, both on the pulp and the log side. We actually had a woodlot that we had started to cut a couple of times, and through various reasons, loggers didn't work out. And then right before another one was about to get started, he actually decided that he was going to quit the business, that the job before ours was the one that he was done with, so he didn't get onto us. All this time, we had a hemlock market. We actually were able to move logs. We had a hemlock pulp market. We finally had it cut this winter, and the day that the crew started, they did a great job, but the day the crew started, ND shut off all deliveries of hemlock. So it's like you have this great idea, you plan, the markets are there, and logs are great. I mean, we can still move hemlock logs. They don't pay a lot, but there are kind of special niche markets out there for some hemlock. But hemlock pulp is a problem. You know, we ended up putting the tops and most of that would have made pulp into biomass, unfortunately, but it was the prescription for that lot. It needed a reset. As far as cedar goes, again, cedar mills are full. The cedar market's going to follow the housing market. So if you're making fences or if you're making decking or siding, if the housing market suffers, I think they're going to be full of wood and probably be reluctant to bring on a lot more wood until they kind of see where orders are coming in moving forward. And then as far as just other points to make, and then I'd love to just open up to hear your questions. Like I started with, nobody really knows where this is going to go. There was an email about pellets, what the pellet mills are going to do. It's really hard to say. The general response across the board for all mills is they're full. Well, this time of year, they tend to be full. But if the orders, if the mill is outproducing what their customers can take, then you have just the unknown of what am I going to pay for something that might take months to go through my system. So, in general, I would say we have reason to be thankful, again, as I mentioned, because it's mud season. I think we have reason to be optimistic because the virus, as we've all probably seen, has this curve, and the idea is to flatten the curve, and that's what we're all trying to do. Eventually, this will even out. It will hopefully go away, and hopefully there will be a treatment or vaccine of some sort to help it. There's a question about what the COVID-19 will have on summer startup. One thing I haven't talked about yet is labor, right? So up until this point, finding a logger, a good logger, reputable logger, you really need to get in line for some of these guys a year out, maybe more. And again, there's always variables in different situations. The nice thing about logging is it is done outside, obviously, and you usually don't have people within 6 feet of a massive feller buncher or cut to length system, hopefully not. So I think as far as getting people to work and actually doing the harvest, I don't see that being a problem. I think the markets are going to be the bigger problem, the price. As I indicated, we had a wood lot that was very heavy to hemlock. The prescription for that lot was to cut it hard. We don't really bring chippers into our operations, but we, in this case, brought in a crew that could reset the forest and really, turn it away from a hemlock grove that hadn't been cut for decades and give something else a chance to grow. Had that been an oak forest, for example, or something we had gone by before where the market was just terrible, again, we may make that decision of maybe we postpone the harvest, maybe we look to do something else, or maybe we just do a real thinning of stems that were never going to be any more valuable. You have a pallet log, it's never going to be more than a pallet log. You can take that case by case. But I do think labor may loosen up. Again, it's hard to say if there's a lot of people that are losing jobs or if they're laid off or unable to get unemployment for whatever reason. We may see more availability of people willing to frame houses, for example, or work in the woods or drive truck. This has been a real problem over the past couple of years, finding labor. One of the reasons why house construction is so far off is the cost of materials have gone up, but the cost of labor has gone up substantially, and the logging community is not immune to that. Dana says, if markets don't rebound and prices suppressed, what impact do you think this will have on logging capacity? Again, if you can't sell it, or if the landowner doesn't want to sell it for what is being offered, then the landowner might choose not to cut it. My guess, Dana, is that because hardwood pulp is going to be the easiest to move, and because hardwood logs, not across the board, but for the most part, I think are going to be easily moved. we're going to go back to kind of how it was in 2015, 2016, when Madison Paper closed, when there was no softwood market at all in central Maine, or, not to speak of. Everybody rushed to hardwood. Every single truck that I saw coming down 201 was hardwood. Again, just in my observation, because that's what you could cut. So I think if the loggers are able to find hardwood lots, I think that's what's going to drive activity. Again, if you can't sell it, or if the landowner doesn't want to cut it because the price isn't where it's going to be, or the markets are uncertain, then it may reduce capacity. But again, that's just a matter of really the relationship and what they have ahead. We're in central Maine. I've got more acres of cedar and hemlock and fir that's blowing down than I care to count. If we're going to go into our land and cut, we have to cut the hemlock and we have to cut the cedar. We're not going to go in just to do that, but in the course of going in and starting to work, that's what's going to come up. And so it may be that the landowner works with the loggers to come up with a solution. For example, we've put cedar in roads before. Use cedar as a water bar when there's no market for it, just because we want it cut. We've also been able to work out with loggers if there's undesirable species, but we want them cut, special pricing or maybe even a fee to go in and chip. Again, before there was a softwood market, people were blowing chips back into the woods and actually paying the logger or the crew to do that because they want it to look a certain way. So like all things, I think creativity and just coming up with a good strategy in your situation as a landowner with the logger is always the best way forward.
Ethan, there was a couple questions that were sent before today's meeting. One was actually long-term market for cedar, which I think you've answered. But the other question from Herb was, is it worth the time to cultivate veneer logs? And if yes, for what species?
I would say it's always worth cultivating veneer logs. I mean, the veneer market follows the saw log market closely for a variety of reasons. But I know when we had our log yards, people would come in and they would always, often they would get a veneer, but sometimes it didn't make veneer for whatever reason, but it would make a prime log. And so if the log market is good, chances are even if it didn't make veneer, you'd still get a prime log. The other thing about veneer logs typically is if it looks like a veneer as a stem, it's just going to gain size. So if you waited a year or a couple years or even a decade, depending on the tree, if it truly is a veneer, it's just going to gain in size. And so, yeah, I'd say always cultivate veneer. Absolutely. I think the thing about veneer buyers right now is, again, they're full. So right now is not the time to be out marketing a bunch of veneer that you have cut. But again, how many people have a whole stack of veneer piled up waiting to ship right now? I hope not. As far as species, I mean, the veneer logs that we're going to get here in the state are primarily oak, maybe ash, a really good, white hard maple. But it's primarily oak and ash, and the oak is really what's going to drive most of that veneer, at least in our region. So short answer is yes, I would absolutely cultivate veneer and just be mindful of the markets before you cut it. The good news, again, from talking to folks, there was talk about the export markets, and particularly China. Some of the buyers and brokers over there ended up splitting the tariffs. So there was about a 25% tariff. So there was a 12.5% split between the buyer and the seller. And I've been told that the price on oak, particularly oak, going to China in particular, even without the tariffs, the price has gone up more than 12.5%. So it's almost like the tariff may have built in a little bit of a premium already. And now that their factories are starting to get up and running, that's actually a good thing. The price has kind of stayed, even without the tariff, at the tariff level. It's hard to say how much further up that's going to go. Again, we need to wait and see what demand is like once this passes and people start buying and building again. Tom asked about the oak and ash markets outlook. Ash is an interesting species. Obviously, we have the emerald ash borer that's knocking at our doors, or here in some cases. What we've seen in other parts of the country, particularly Ohio, where this hit 10 years ago or so, New York State, there's a huge push to cut ash, and so you actually saw kind of a glut of ash on the market. From what I read and from what I understand, ash throughout the country, just even as oak prices start to stabilize and demand for oak starts to happen, ash hasn't followed. That's not to say it won't, sorry, it may follow. In the lumber world, ash and oak can be kind of interchanged. If you're going to stain it, they both have an open grain. And what's happened previously is when red oak gets really, really high, it gets built up. Some particularly Asian buyers will switch and they'll try to get ash just to see what the better price is. But with everything so, depressed right now for pricing, they want the oak. The oak is in demand. Relatively speaking, there's no race for oak right now, but relatively speaking, it's in demand. As far as red oak, I think it's something that from the Northeast, we have a bit of a disadvantage because the demand domestically, without question, is for white oak. We don't have white oak. So, every single, I think I've had one red oak inquiry for flooring in the past, 2 months. Everything is white oak, walnut. And so from the Northeast perspective, we're at a disadvantage from the domestic market. There is still domestic demand for red oak, but for a lot of people, it reminds them of the 80s. And so there's this push away from it. I mean, like all things, maybe the 80s come back. We're not wearing leg warmers and fluorescent pants yet, but maybe we will be. The 80s will come back. So if there's that, then maybe red oak will come back as a fashion. I don't see it. But again, with the export markets driving the red oak demand, if the export markets stop like they did, it shuts everything down. When the tariffs hit, again, we have to rewind before this virus. That we were just devastated with these tariffs because the industry had worked for a really long time to try to find buyers and to try to develop an appetite for the species that we grow more red oak in the country than any other species, hardwood species. And they did it, and it was a great thing. And then the tariffs hit, and so the hope now is that the Chinese buyers haven't gone to Africa or South America or somewhere else and developed a taste for another species that they can substitute. Who knows if they did? I don't think so. Again, there's still demand for the domestic hardwoods. And incidentally, instead of it just being make a product that ultimately comes back to the U.S., my understanding is that the appetite for red oak is actually driven by the growing middle class in China for their own homes, which is great. We want to continue that.
Jay Hall has his hand raised. Jay, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Jay? Well, he had sent along questions before today's meeting, asking about the different markets for the different species. You may have already answered some of them. Let's see.
So yeah, you sent that to me. So softwood pulp and 9 dragons, including hemlock and pine. This must be sorted by species and only 8 foot long accepted. The 8 foot is for the J mill. That's, I think, and also 9 dragons, Rumford. I think they're wanting only aspen to Rumford. They have a chipping facility in Farmington, a chipping facility at Peter Carrier's in Hinckley. And so those places can take tree length, and it should be separated by species. Again, you want to check with the wood buyer and check with the specs. For example, they have pretty specific specifications for aspen groundwood. It can't just come in random length. It's got to come in, I believe, 4-foot increments. But your logger and your forester would hopefully know. He also asked about pine pulp to the Athens pallet mill. My understanding is that Linkletter is full. That we all hope that there will be markets for pine pulp and hemlock pulp, and the pellet mills may get back to that. But this is the time of year where we're not burning pellets, and maybe they're building up their supply. To be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But my guess would be that it's really going to be dependent on what they still have in inventory, and also who's buying the pellets that they're making with the pine versus with hardwood, or another option. He also asked about hemlock logs and the outlook for mixed biomass. Talk about the biomass first. So the mills buy biomass and they burn it to make electricity. 5-6 years ago, they put natural gas pipelines, one that terminated at Sappi and one that went to Madison, and there may be another. I know that Sappi has switched to natural gas. I think they're still burning some biomass, but the natural gas allows them actually to operate with fewer people. So my understanding is that by switching to natural gas, it may cost them more, but if they can operate with fewer people in anticipation of workers getting sick or not reporting or being out, they could operate on that. This changes daily though. And this is the time of year where it doesn't get as cold. Maybe they're not burning as much. So biomass, yeah, this time of year, biomass is really pretty tight. It's always the things that we have the most of are at the time of the year where the mills want them the least, and then the reverse is also true. When they want them the most, we have the least. So typically they're buying more and more biomass in the colder months, whereas the biomass, this is the time of year biomass tends to come from cleanups and that sort of thing. Yeah, as far as the hemlock logs, again, there are markets for hemlock logs. There are some niche markets for smaller, shorter, narrower logs. For the most part, it's going into beams. There was a timber mat market for hemlock, but again, I don't think that the mat log buyers, or excuse me, the timber mat buyers are looking for hemlock. They really want hardwood. But in general, hemlock is one of those tricky species, because if you have a log, you definitely want to cut it. But if there's no pulp market, and you can't move biomass, then you really have to think twice about what to do with the rest of the tree. And then the last question was the white pine market is tight. Again, I think the pine lumber is selling. It's just that people are being careful about what they're buying. So pine logs are pretty much on hold right now until the mill is getting a handle on what's selling. And again, what we're delivering now to jobs now are products that were specified 6-8 months ago that are now getting delivered. So the question is, what does the next 6 or 12 months look like? How is that going to work? Dan asks, what's the biggest opportunity for the Maine timber industry moving forward? That's a great question. I'll tell you, everybody I talk to, particularly on the logger side, almost to a person, they seem unfazed by all of this. Yeah, I think loggers in general are used to up and down. Things open up, things close. the weather's not perfect and then it's perfect and you got to work, 16-hour days. So from the logger side, it seems like people are obviously concerned, but it's just another bump in the road that people can deal with. The opportunity for the timber industry, we have one of the greatest outlets for our products in our paper mills. And again, there are parts of the country that they just can't move pulp, or they have to truck it all the way to Hinckley from, Connecticut, New York. That's a huge opportunity. The other thing that I'd always point out is that the mills that are investing in their facilities, I mean, you look at Sappi just did a couple $100 million improvement on their wood room. It's huge, very important, and something we should all be again grateful, because they're investing for the future. What ND Paper is doing for their operations, what Woodland has done up in Baileyville. So we've got this investment into our mills, and we may get logs when we go in to harvest a woodlot, but we're definitely going to get pulp. And the fact that we can move it locally, I think we should all be really, really grateful for that. So I don't know if that answers your question about the biggest opportunity, but I think we have a great opportunity with those mills. There's been talk about this big timber. I went to a presentation up at Maine a couple years ago, and it's fantastic. And I take my hat off to whoever ponies up the money to put one of those facilities in, and it could be a huge opportunity. The startup costs are incredibly high, and the use of the product is still in its infancy. So, it's kind of a risky bet. But I hope that they set it up. I hope they build it, and I hope they buy a lot of wood, because we have it. The only other thing I'd say is that and I think just since Dana was on this call, tip to Dana and what he's done to try to cultivate the next generation of loggers. I think the opportunity in the timber industry is really encouraging younger people who may want to develop a career in forestry or in logging. And there's been a lot of effort, like I said, through Dana's organization, as well as University of Maine, to try to develop the next generation of loggers. Last I checked, the average age of the logger in the woods was in their mid-50s. So we have an opportunity to help train and cultivate the next generation, and to encourage people and not to discourage them from that. I would say they're like, take Sappi, for example. Sappi has the people that have replaced the outgoing class, let's call them, the folks that have recently retired. These are guys in their late 20s and early 30s. I mean, Sappi has invested in a younger person that's hopefully going to be there for the long term. It's fantastic. I mean, it's amazing that they've done that and they have the foresight to do that. I think we should be doing the same and look at it as an opportunity for, not only our lifetimes, but for our kids and grandkids, because eventually we need to replenish the workforce. And I think it's an opportunity that we should be pursuing.
Ethan, I'm going to unmute. There's two people on the phone. I'm going to unmute the two folks on the phone and see if they might have a question.
Okay.
So we have two people calling in by phone. Do you have a question for Ethan?
Yeah, Jen, this is Herb White. Do you any insight or impact on the latest trade deal with Canada?
That's a great question. I'm not up to speed on it, to be honest with you. I can tell you that Quebec right now is shut down until May. I think they were supposed to open up next week, and that has been postponed until May. So certainly any trade deal is better than just, everyone sitting at odds from each other. I think it was frustrating when the softwood agreement expired after 10 years plus a year to work it up, and nobody made any effort seemingly to see it coming. It's kind of like a slow moving train that you stand in the tracks and it runs you over. But to answer your question, I don't know. I would have to look at it. I think that my personal opinion is that we have a border with Canada, but for me, it's really no different than the border with New Hampshire, because we have loggers that, want to work where they're working, and mills that want to buy what they are making. Again, it kind of gets into a slippery slope of fair trade and that sort of thing. But I would be encouraging more trade, more opportunity, rather than trying to limit it.
Sorry, I'll repeat myself. I just had myself on mute. Anybody else on the phone who wants to ask a question? And at the same time, please raise your hand or send a chat if you have a question. If you're on video. Make sure that you unmute yourself if you are about to ask a question through audio.
Just to kind of, go back to where we started, the fact that this virus has happened during mud season is huge. And I appreciate the questions about the future and long term. It always used to drive me nuts that my father would talk about a forest, 20 or 30 years from now. And it just never, how can you even think 20 or 30 years? Now I'm at an age where he was probably telling me those things when, he was how old I am now, and I get it. And so looking 20, 30 years in the future is where we need to be, and thinking about the next harvest and what we're leaving behind. Regardless of what's happening in the news or what's happening today or this month or even this year or even the next 5 years, we're going to have a pulp and paper industry in the state of Maine. We're going to have sawmills in the state of Maine. I didn't have that thought in 2015. I really did not. I remember when everything was collapsing, I was convinced that by the time that I was the age my father is, that we would no longer have pulp and paper mills. I'm glad I'm wrong. I'm firmly believing that I was wrong at the time, because of the investment into the mills that they're putting, because that the companies that own the mills are actually consuming the products that they're making, and they're not just owned by a private equity company. So long term, I think we really have an advantage over the rest of the country. And I think we should be really, really thankful for that. Prices will go up, prices will go down, species will be able to move or not. But in general, I think we should be pretty grateful to have the timber resource we do, as well as the pulp markets that we do.
We had another person by phone who just arrived. I've unmuted the phone. So if there's a question. Right. Well, Ethan, I appreciate your time working with us. Oh, I see another question. You see it?
Yeah, can you comment on the spruce budworm and your thoughts on the risk moving forward, how to mitigate? That's a great question. Any of the insects that we're dealing with, the woolly adelgid, the emerald ash borer, and the budworm, you kind of have to keep a close eye on your area and how quickly it's moving and where you are. It's kind of a unique to the law. It's also unique to your situation. With the spruce market being the way that it is, I mean, if you really wanted to go and cut the spruce and cut it hard, you could do that. I think you'd be taking a pretty big hit financially based on where the market's at now. To my knowledge, there is no, I don't know if you want to spray or if there's a way that you could work on it, through a pesticide. But I think in general, you just need to be mindful of your situation, your woodlot. Again, from a market standpoint, what we saw with the emerald ash borer, for example, is that everyone went out and cut ash, and it flooded the market, and it really drove the price of ash down. We haven't, hemlock, for example. I think one of our woodlots is in Brooks, and we just got notice that the woolly adelgid, the zone is now right on the line of Brooks. So from Penobscot Bay coming in. And does that change our outlook or how we plan on harvesting? Not yet. I mean, if we really start to see trees starting to be killed, or we really see a real infestation, we'll probably have to consult with some experts or bring in some more firepower to figure out what the best way forward is for that. We've had budworm outbreaks before. It was before my time in the business, but I can say that there is, indication that these things do come and go. Again, from a landowner perspective, from a market perspective, if you can cut it when the markets are best, or if you can wait for that, that's great. If it's really a problem, if it's just an infestation that needs to be dealt with, then that's its own situation, so you don't lose more of your standing timber.
Great. Well, again, appreciate your time today. It looks like, great. Thanks, Herb. Appreciate your attendance, Herb. Herb was one of our members who I talked to on the phone, who gave me a little Zoom confidence, because this is a really new technology for us as an organization. So I think we're finding a lot of success in this format. As I had said in a previous event we did online, I wish we were in the woods right now. This is not our, best. This is not who we are in a way. We do like doing our programs in the woods, but we are also very grateful that we have this opportunity to reach out and have so many people. We had nearly 30 people on this call from probably multiple states. I think we have someone from Canada who's participating today. And so with this technology, this gives us a chance to broaden our reach and maybe allow people to attend a program that haven't been able to attend programs in the past. So we are holding two more. We have 2 more of these scheduled now. We're going to be scheduling several more over the next 6 weeks to 2 months, depending on the situation and the lockdown realities that we're facing. Our next, as I had said before, our next program is going to be this Friday from 9 to 10. And I will be sending out Zoom link for that meeting. If you've registered for that, it's Fireside Forestry Silviculture Q&A with Dr. Bob Seymour. And then Nancy Olmstead from the Maine Natural Areas Program talking about invasive plants will be April 16th in the evening. It's going to be a 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. program. So we're also trying out different times. So this was, I guess you would call this a brown bag seminar today. This is a lunch hour seminar. It seemed to work for a lot of people's schedule. Probably do another one at this time. We probably will have Ethan back to check in and see how things are going, maybe a month later to see what the realities are. And again, please visit our website to get updates. If you're a member, you will be receiving, we'll be continuing with our newsletter, both electronically and in our printed format. So, and if you're not a member, please visit our website and click on membership and become a member today. It's one of the best ways to support this organization. And I appreciate everybody's participation and interest in this. And please also send me an email if you have any questions or thoughts about future programs. You can contact me at Jen, Jenn, at mainewoodlandowners.org. And of course, our website is www.mainewoodlandowners.org. And I look forward to hearing from folks during this period of time where we're all home, looking for ways to keep our brains active and thinking about the forest and all the good work that's being done out in Maine's woodlands. So appreciate, again, everybody's time and look forward to seeing more of you or many of you at our next online program.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Ethan. All right, everybody, stay safe.